Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Leadership Lounge podcast. If you haven't seen us before and you're watching us on the YouTube channel, make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. Make sure you follow us on your podcast provider. And our aim, as ever, is to have some amazing people with amazing stories and experts in their field. And we're talking to future-focused leaders. And through the power of TDL, we're connecting that community of people and giving real value along your journey, getting those aha moments. And talking about those aha moments, I really want you to tell us how you can relate to this episode and what your takeaways were at the end. So today we are speaking to Gavin. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on. We've only recently met through one of our associates and one of our one of our podcast guests, Tom Phillips. He's not ex, he's still with us. And you've got an amazing background that I can relate to from a military perspective, but I'm really interested to see how you got into this world without a military background, because that's where my background is. So, Gavin, as I hit the 20-minute timer, without taking any sort of shine off your introduction, introduce yourself to the people who don't know who you are and tell us a little bit about what you do and what you've done.
Certainly. So I'm a former civil servant for the British Ministry of Defence. I've worked in the security and intelligence industry for around about 20 years in a spectrum of areas, from covert surveillance, human intelligence gathering, close protection, all sorts of things. I've done what they call TDYs, or temporary duties, mainly covering a lot of the time for people who are actually on vacation or holiday leave. I'm a best-selling author of the book How to Tell If Someone Is Lying, and ranked at the moment number 28 in the world body language expert, amongst many other things.
Excellent. So just from that introduction, I'm now again worrying about the timing, but it's going to be a fantastic. So we just to share a story from, I went back into the military with my business to work with some specialist teams which have got similar background to what you've done as well, in human intelligence and interrogation techniques, etc. How did you get into it without the military background? Tell me that story.
Not the usual way, because most people do end up either going down the route of working for something like special reconnaissance and then moving to military intelligence from there, or they get the tap on the shoulder from college and they get brought straight down to say, like the training facility that MI6 use eventually, and they get into it that way. I was quite the opposite. I did everything bass-ackwards, if you'll pardon the expression. I had a knock on the door from a friend of mine who started me off. He did something called process serving, or per-serving. And for those who don't know what it is, it's literally when a lawyer needs a document serving directly to a person and they need to know it's been handed to them in person. So hence the name per-serve. And he said, look, Gavin, you're one of the most resourceful people I know. I'm having difficulty finding someone. I've been trying for ages. Can you help me? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? And he, I found him in the same day, handed him the envelope, job done. Didn't think too much more of it until around about 3 or 4 weeks later, he came back round and he gave me an envelope full of cash. And I said, what's this for? He said, you remember that person you found for me? He says, that's your share for finding him. And I looked at this envelope full of cash and I thought, have you got any more of them people you want finding?
And so how old were you at that point?
I was very young at that point. I was 18, 19. Okay. But I'd always been very kind of mature for my age. I'd got my own home, my own car, my own life going on at that point. And that was when, like I say, I don't know why, but I'd always kind of grown up young. So I left school early and went my own way very early. So that was how I got into that side of it. And I started doing my own thing where I was per-serving, and that led on to all sorts of private investigations, from everything from kind of marital affairs to fraud investigations and so on and so forth. I've worked for insurance companies that then eventually worked with government departments. That's things like benefit fraud and that kind of thing, where people were claiming benefits and working at the same time. And I weaved my way through different government departments and managed to get the best and rub shoulders with the right people. And eventually I started doing the contracting down the investigation and then intelligence side of things. I'm wrapping up a kind of long 20-year career here in as quick as I can. But and of course, because I'd worked in the private sector so long, I've got a great reputation. I've done everything from penetration testing and perimeter testing, right up to the, like I said, the close protection side of things. And eventually I just managed to be rubbing shoulders with the right people in the right government departments to then be on the books for the MOD. And I'd been jealous all of my life of all the people who were officially working for whether it was an intelligence agency or a government department. And I was like, wow, these guys get holiday and paid leave and pensions and all the things I don't get. I basically send an invoice off and 30 days later get an excuse as to why they can't pay it this month. So, and if I don't work, I don't eat. So I'd done that for many, many years. So when I finally got the job officially on the books, I went through all the background checks, about 12 months of background checks and everything else, and became in the fold, as it were. Within a few months I hated it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't stand it. And I was like,
Oh,
wow, this was what I was so envious of. And it was something where the grass was not greener on the other side. It was, the bureaucracy was crazy, the form filling, the whole kind of chain of command. It was very different to what I'd formerly known. As a contractor, it was a case of, this is what you want, we want you to do. Go and do it, and then invoice us when the job's done. And that was it. I wasn't given any instruction on how to achieve it. So I went out and achieved the objective and then come back and said, right, there you go, job done, there's my invoice. So when it got to the point where I couldn't even change my car parking space without 3 emails, 2 forms and permission off the CO, it got to the point where I thought, I'm not sure I can do this.
Do you know what? I think so many people can relate to that maybe in those positions right now. I've got a question, and thank you so much for doing that so quickly with regards to such a big career, but we'll delve into some highlights. But even saying, like, how did you get into it? It still sounded quite slick and easy.
Oh yeah, well, it wasn't.
So tell me a little bit about your learning curve personally, about what that, I'm going to say comfort zone, like where were you sort of stretched, and what did you learn about yourself in the early days of you having to sort of, in a military term, being like winging it, like having to learn on your feet? How did you get that skill set from doing it yourself?
Well, a lot of it was, I mean, don't get me wrong, there was a lot of trial and error, and I will give credit where it's due to a lot of really good friends that I called upon that way, either were military or were intelligence. And because I'd always associated myself with people within these circles, I could call them up and say, look, how do I get this? Or can I, whether it was a police officer that I could call in a favor and just say, you wouldn't happen to know where somebody or something is, would you? And things like that. So there was a lot of favor calling in the early days. Like I said, a hell of a lot of trial and error, and learning things the hard way, and also learning what jobs to say no to.
Right, interesting.
Yeah, because what happens is, this is the nightmare of working like on a self-employed basis as a contractor, is the phone won't ring for months, and you'll start to panic and you think, oh, the bills are racking up, and then all of a sudden you'll get 3 phone calls in one day, all offering you 3 different jobs, one in Saudi Arabia, one in Africa, one in Ireland, all the different rates of pay, all sounding better than the other, and they'll all be at the same time. And you have to turn 2 of them down and pick one. And usually the ones that sound really, really easy for a high amount of money are the ones that you want to avoid like the plague.
John, again, I'm sure this is what I said to you. There's going to be a lot of people in this that can go, I can relate to that. In a completely different context.
Yeah,
they can relate to it. And I'm conscious that there might be a lot of people listening to this, that this is a new conversation around intelligence and what goes on behind the scenes, etc. I've got a couple of people that I've got earmarked to come on the podcast at some point in the future when they can. For somebody that doesn't know the world of intelligence, could you give us your basics? Like, what happens? that we don't know about that you're comfortable telling us, all that sort of thing, the people that always ask?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can't go into the nuts and bolts of everything, but I can give you an overview of the basics.
Perfect.
From my perspective, and from most the friends in MI6, MI5, or with CIA all around the world, most of the time we're given an objective of usually a person that they have a person of interest, and they will say, can you associate yourself, I'll say, with this particular person, and you'll watch this person, you'll establish like patterns of life for this person, which days they walk the dog and where, which days they go to the gym and the cafe, that kind of thing. And essentially it's your job to make friends with this person. And you have to establish three things: motivation, access, and security. The motivation can be anything from whether it's financial motivation or whatever the case may be, but can you motivate this person to do what you want them to do? Number two, access. Have they got access to secrets that we want? Number three, security. Is it safe for you and for them to be able to do this? Because if either of you are going to be in any danger, then you're meant to say the whole thing's off, which we all ignore that bit. So because that takes all the fun out of it. So those are your main things. So, but if you think of motivation and access, if they can be motivated and have access to what you need, that's it. So you establish your patterns of life. You do what's called a smile campaign, and you build up a very slow and steady relationship with this person. And eventually, when the time's right, you then pitch this person for the kind of what you want them to do, which is obviously to get secrets for you, and then you get those secrets, you take them back, and that's it, job done. So that's the whole thing in a nutshell, really. Yeah. There's obviously a lot more to it, but that's to summarize what we have to do. Yeah.
I love that. So tell me about when you said about smile campaign. It just made me think about influence and communication, and that in sort of business culture now, I think with the tech evolution, there's a lot of we call ourselves the empower yourself mentality, the happiness culture. Like, people listening to this are in the corporate world and are trying to have smiley faces. We're all able to be more happy and productive and efficient if that happens. So is there something in that process that you could relate to into the business world?
Probably. I think down to people get like kind of comfortable with consistency. And this is where our smile campaign comes in. I mean, there was a going back a few years, I won't give you the full story, but there was a Russian intelligence officer in London who was whiter than white. There was nothing on him. There was no compromise. There was nothing we could seem to exploit. And the only thing we spotted was his love for animals. And he used to walk his dog every day. So what we did is we set up an operative. It wasn't me, it was somebody else, and she used to walk her dog in the opposite direction every day. And there wasn't anything other than that regular contact of building up. I'm here, you're here. Same time every day. And because people get used to that, kind of familiarity, that's the whole foundation. Because they start to feel comfortable now, and this is normal. This is okay. So for the business world, I suppose that it's exactly the same thing why so many people that they spend thousands and thousands, maybe even millions on brand advertising, just to make you keep seeing their logo and seeing their brand, just because of that familiarity. So when you need that particular product, they're like, oh yeah, that's the one we see everywhere. So that's the one they pick. Yeah. So,
I know I'm thinking some of the conversations and some of the things we get involved with. It's that constant touch points. It's that constant showing up, like not necessarily showing up with your team when you need to show up with your team. Like, no, it's always an official meeting, or it's always an email. It's kind of having those constant. So I love that. And I was smiling through that as well, because you said about the dog walk. So one of my co-founders of the new business, I met on the dog walk.
Oh, wow.
And when we moved to our current house, every time I went on the dog walk, I seemed to take longer, and I ended up having to take my business card with me because I'd get into conversations with people about what they did and how they did it. And so I was laughing as
It
you were
works
saying
well.
that.
Yeah, it works very, very well. It's a great system, you know. So hopefully that's you're going to have every intelligence officer in the world there thinking, I need to walk my dog a different route.
So tell us a little bit about your sort of what are you doing now? Tell me about the book. You've written a book, haven't you?
Yeah, I've done a few. So my best-selling book is a non-fiction book called How to Tell If Someone Is Lying. And this revolves around something that I like to call CCA, or combined communication analysis. So this is a mixture. I've got a degree in psychology. I'm qualified in body language. I'm qualified in statement analysis and all these things. And I look at everything. So it's not just the body language, it's the blink rate, it's the breath location, it's the body movement and the pattern analysis of body movements. It's absolutely everything, and taking it all into account, what they're saying, the pitch, the speed, the tone, the cadence, how it's been said, the structure of the sentence. Absolutely everything is all pertinent with the body language as well.
I hope everybody else is feeling exactly what I'm feeling now, very conscious of everything I'm doing. Do you get that a lot?
I do, actually. In fact, I had to go for a position not so long back where I was working with the British Army, and I had 3 high-ranking officers I was being interviewed by all at once. And normally, in most situations, it's the 3 high-ranking officers that are looking at the person that's been very, the civilian usually very nervous, thinking, and they were sitting on their hands.
Don't give anything away.
Yeah, exactly. And I said, look, it's not. I'm not constantly switched on doing this. It's not something that I mean, there are some things obviously which are really, really blatant when people do, but it's not something that I'm constantly watching everybody's every move. It's something when I'll analyze as and when I need to.
I think I like about this though, because speaking to some of the people that we've got that we're able to put in front of businesses and some friends of mine, it's like any skill, isn't it? You hone a skill over time, and it becomes a subconscious thing that is your skill set.
Yeah.
What sort of things can people be aware of that can help their team and themselves get better at? And I'm keeping that quite broad question there, because I know the amount of different things that you've been involved with, but in the business world, you talked just before we jumped on about the importance of interview processes, for example, or recognizing body language on technology now. Like, we've all moved from the boardroom to hybrid working, so we've now got the screen issue. I call it an issue. It's a barrier to get over. But what sort of things have you got for advice and guidance for others?
I suppose the best bit of advice really would probably be, I say to people, I'm in the business of change. So look for change or deviation from the norm. And because there is no body language dictionary, and I get this all the time when people, they'll turn around and they'll say, oh, so you do body language? I say, yeah. And they'll fold their arms and they'll go, what am I thinking? I say, I'm not psychic. I'm not a mind reader. I look at body language, and the other side of it is this kind of misconception that there is a X movement equals Y action or thought. There is no direct translation, as it were. So you're looking for what people normally do. If people normally fold their arms while they're talking, and that's usual and that's baseline for them, then it doesn't mean they're being defensive. It doesn't mean anything at all. It's just what they normally do. But if people don't normally fold their arms, and then all of a sudden you ask them a question and then they do, and they've got a frown and they've got what I call a cluster of tells going on all at once, that's when you say, something's not right there, something's different, something's moved from the norm, from their baseline, and that's when you can probe a little bit further. So
excellent. I might put you on the spot here a little bit about interviews.
Yeah.
So it just came to me then that people always say, like, what's the best interview question? Or like, what sort of things do I need to shake it up? Because when you were saying then about body language, it's having the awareness over time that things can change, which I love that. And we say about helping people improve their self and situational awareness, like, you're just tuned into this sort of thing more than you would be.
Yeah.
So in interviews, like people will be listening to this that are involved in interview processes. And as you know, and we know, it's really important to get that first interaction right. Do people ask you about what are the best questions? What are your best questions?
Okay, so I'll give you a couple of things. One, I'll give you a body language thing to look for, and two, I'll give you a fantastic question. So
perfect. We've only got 2 minutes left, so this is a great finish.
Really
I like
quick.
it.
So look for the feet. Are the feet sticking right out? If they are, then that person is comfortable and relaxed. And if you ask them something and all of a sudden they draw their feet right in under the chair, then that's something that you have to pay attention to. That is a sudden shift of comfort, and they are starting to feel very uncomfortable with sorry about this, very uncomfortable with what's going on. So look for that. Secondly, question wise, one of the best things you can do is ask them for a time they messed up. Because everybody has messed up in life. Everybody has. I don't care who they are. We've all done it. I've done it several times, and that's just today. And watch their reaction, because they've got to try and come up with a time that they messed up, how they rectified it, what they did, what caused it, and somehow kind of own it. And that really makes people squirm. And if they sit there and go, "I've never messed up, I'm brilliant," then you know that that's definitely not true.
I like that, because you're just. I think and I've not really been involved in a lot of interview processes, but they can be quite clunky, can't they, and quite samey. So to put something in there that's open and can get people to reflect and come up with something quite interesting and says a lot about something. But again, you're right, it's the reaction to that, isn't it? Was it a learning moment? Have you learned from it? What's changed now? I absolutely love that. So Gavin, thank you so much for your time.
No problem at all. I enjoyed it.
I know that we're going to have you on in the future. I know when we started the Leadership Lounge podcast, the iteration from #leadership, what's on your mind, we said we were going to be hosting panel discussions.
Oh yeah.
So we are going to, that's on my next radar, to get people that have been on before around a certain subject to have a discussion. So I know that we're going to be having something that you can add your skill set and add value to. So we're definitely going to be having you on, because there's so much there that we need to be showing and sharing with people. So thank you so much for your time today. Ladies and gents, if you enjoyed that, I can't believe how quick it went. We covered quite a lot. I'm definitely going to be listening back to this one. Make sure you let us know your takeaway. What surprised you? What made you think about your leadership journey? And make sure you share it on the social media with us. I'm going to put Gavin's links in the podcast notes below. So make sure you go and check him out, connect with Gavin. And we'll be back next week on your podcast provider and YouTube with another amazing person with amazing stories and experts in their field. So Gavin, thank you again.
Thank you very much. It was enjoyable.
And we'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye.